Welcome to SLP Nerdcast, the #1 professional resource for evidence-based practice in speech-language pathology. I'm Kate Granbois.
And I'm Amy Wonka. We are both speech-language pathologists working in the field and co-founders of SLP Nerdcast.
Each episode of this podcast is a course offered for ASHA CEUs. Our podcast audio courses are here to help you level up your knowledge and earn those professional development hours that you need. This course, plus the corresponding short post-test, is equal to 1 certificate of attendance. To earn CEUs today and take the post-test after this session, follow the link provided in the show notes or head to slpnerdcast.com.
Before we get started, one quick disclaimer. Our courses are not meant to replace clinical advice. We do not endorse products, procedures, or other services mentioned by our guests unless otherwise specified.
We hope you enjoy the course.
Are you an SLP or related professional? The SLP Nerdcast Unlimited subscription gives members access to over 100 courses offered for ASHA CEUs and certificates of attendance. With SLP Nerdcast membership, you can earn unlimited CEUs all year at any time. SLP Nerdcast courses are unique, evidence-based, with a focus on information that is useful. When you join SLP Nerdcast as a member, you'll have access to the best online platform for continuing education in speech and language pathology. Join as a member today and save 10% using code NERDCASTER10. The link for membership is in the show notes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. We are really excited to welcome Brandon Siegel onto the show. Brandon, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kate. I am so excited to be part of all our SLP nerds and beyond. It's really exciting for me.
You know, you can't not mention the name. I've had so many people be like, "Oh, interesting name." You're in the right place. I feel like you're a business nerd, you're a medical billing nerd, and here we are.
Absolutely. I've got literally when we started this, you saw my little Doppler twin of me, which is basically a nerdy kid with glasses. The only thing that was missing was the beard, which came later in life.
That's wonderful. It's great. Well, we're really glad to have you here. I know you and I have touched base multiple times before we hit the record button, and you've taught me a lot, and I'm really excited to share your knowledge with our entire listener base. You are here to discuss funding options in private practice. So selfishly, I'm in private practice. I'm very excited to learn from you today. But before we start, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What brings you to the world of funding in private practice?
Well, a couple things. First and foremost, everyone should know that my wife, my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law are all therapists. And I've always been a business person, even though if you talk to me as a child, I would tell you I'm not a business person. My parents kept telling me until one day I had that awakening. And so when I had that awakening, it's a natural muscle for me. And I really have found that although I was bad at math as a child, later in life, I really became just great at communicating numbers. And I say it's one thing to understand numbers, it's another to communicate. And so as I started recognizing the importance of a business algorithm in a private practice, I recognized that I could help solve problems. And so it started with my mother-in-law's practice that had more money than I want to share, outstanding, with major insurance headaches. And basically she was working for free. And it turned into me saying, I have to solve this problem. And so throughout that process, I not only learned how to bill all the insurance, but I really navigated the funding sources from all different ways of funding, more than you can imagine. And I kind of came up with this business algorithm of helping private practices diversify their funding and solve their funding issues in creative ways.
I'm so excited to learn more about it because, as many of our listeners probably know, funding is a huge headache. We don't go to school for this. I won't share the abomination of my personal math skills. I live in Google Sheets and Excel. And we're clinicians by training, and it's really our passion, most of us, to focus on our clinical work. But as many listeners know, if you work in private practice or have a private client on the side, you can't work on your clinical work, focus on your clinical work if you're not getting paid. So unfortunately, these business aspects are a critical piece of what we do for a living. And we're really grateful for people like you to show us the ways, show us the money, so to speak. So you told us a little bit about your background, but you also have a podcast. You're a fellow podcaster, as people who are watching on YouTube can see with your fancy mic.
I am a fellow podcaster. So I have a love-hate relationship, but I love it because people love it. And it's called the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. It's on everything streaming, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, you name it, iTunes or Apple, the whole bit. So the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast with Brandon Siegel.
That's awesome. And I know that you are going to get into some pretty heavy duty stuff with us today. For those of you who are listening, if you are not at all familiar with private practice, this episode is likely not for you. I think the content that we're going to talk about today is intermediate. We're going to be talking about billing codes. We're going to be talking about EMR systems, insurance liability. So if you're already in private practice and either thinking about dipping your toe into the insurance world, or you're already there and wanting to scale your business, then this is the episode for you. Stay tuned. I also want to say that we're going to cover a lot of ground today, and you have a conference coming up where our listeners can learn even more. Do you want to tell us quickly about that?
Absolutely. So we've got a conference called the Growth Code Conference at growthcodeconference.com. It's designed for occupational, physical, speech, language pathologists. We have private practice owners, private practice managers, office managers from coming all over the country to join us February 23rd through February 26th. We've got tons of content, lots of speakers, general sessions. We're covering marketing, we're covering HR, we're covering medical billing, the whole bit. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming to everyone's way. So it's going to be in sunny Florida, February 23rd to 26th.
So everything that we talk about today is just a little bit of a tip of the iceberg. There is more out there. Medical billing and private practice management is a whole career's worth of information, and there's absolutely no way we are going to squeeze it all in. But we'll list everything in the show notes for anybody who's listening, jogging, folding your laundry. If you are after this episode, if you want to go out and learn some more. Before we get into it, I want to take a minute to read through our learning objectives and disclosures. I'll get through them as quickly as possible. Learning objective number 1, describe the difference between private pay and insurance models of funding in private practice. Learning objective number 2, describe at least one creative funding solution in private practice. And learning objective number 3, list 2 strategies to minimize administrative burden when billing in private practice. Disclosures, Brandon Siegel's financial disclosures. Brandon is the owner and founder of WellnessWorks Management Partners, which provides services related to medical billing, marketing, HR services, business coaching, and consulting. WellnessWorks Management Partners is the producer of and has direct financial relationships with the Growth Code Conference, which will be mentioned during this episode. Brandon Siegel's non-financial disclosures. Brandon has no non-financial relationships to disclose. Kate, that's me, my financial disclosures. I am the owner and founder of Grand Bois Therapy and Consulting LLC and co-founder of SLP Nerdcast. My non-financial disclosures, I'm a member of ASHA SIG 12 and serve on the AAC advisory group for Massachusetts Advocates for Children. I'm also a member of the Berkshire Association for Behavior Analysis and Therapy, Mass ABA, the Association for Behavior Analysis International, and the corresponding Speech Pathology and Applied Behavior Analysis Special Interest Group. Okay, let's move on to the fun stuff. I'm almost out of breath from reading that, which is horribly embarrassing. But let's get into the first question. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the different types of funding sources in private practice?
Absolutely. So it's so funny because we get into this field and all we think is usually 3 different funding sources. We think of obviously insurance, which is our medical model. And then we also think of schools because a lot of us will subcontract or work for the schools. And then usually we think of this thing called private pay, cash, but a lot of us don't think it exists in our field when it does. But there are so many different funding options beyond that. Just to unlock some unique perspectives real quick. One is government contracts. A lot of us don't know there's government contracts that will pay for services related to speech therapy, and you might not even know it. And sometimes it's county-based, regional-based. Sometimes it is, government funding like Early Start, DDS, DDD, all that stuff. So the other thing that we're seeing a huge growth in right now is what's called self-funded employer contracts, where companies are now investing to say, I want a special SLP benefit for my employees' children, and I want an AAC benefit. And all of these things where employers are doing self-funded healthcare coverage, but they're adding in direct contracts with local providers to be on site or in the area to support their employees. So there's a huge market right now in the what I call self-funded employer game. Other creative things, obviously, there's nonprofit funding. There's different ways in terms of different types of school contracts. And so we're definitely seeing also subcontracts related to skilled nursing and things that are just not tied to the you accepting insurance. So sometimes we think of either accept insurance or accept private pay and there's nothing else. There are different, even just aging in place contracts. There are grants. There are, again, I'm thinking on the cusp, but I would say that there's at least 25 different funding sources and we only think of 3. And so sometimes it's understanding what our role is in the community and aligning with who has budget connected to that. Because there are groups that will just pay for your services. And sometimes as a speech language pathologist, you'll even get paid cash as an organization from another organization, like an ABA company. There's a lot of creative ways to kind of connect your services so that you're not just stuck in one funding source as your solution.
So right out of the gate, my mind is blown. I've been in private practice for 12 years. No, longer than that. I don't do math. That's fine. I think up until now, I knew about private pay and I knew about insurance and maybe 1 or 2 other things. Like, so I've done school contracts, for example, but I love the perspective of thinking about connecting your services with budgets who have money for you to pay your services, because it sounds like there are such a wider variety of options to choose from.
Absolutely. And I had picked on the employer benefit because that is the biggest thing right now that's changing. In terms of employers right now are seeing, they're expecting like 50, 60, 70% increases to premiums in the coming year because of COVID. So
Holy
they're
moly.
looking at alternative healthcare services. So what if I could change and I'm going to get Kate's company catastrophic coverage for all her employees. I'm going to get them a telehealth subscription. And I'm also going to get a subscription to a local speech provider for their kids because I know that our families really value therapy. So we're going to create a monthly subscription where we do what's called a capitated contract with them versus a fee-for-service contract. So there's all different ways to kind of think outside the box to help each other out.
Okay, so if you're a clinician listening to this episode, your mind is blown like me, and you're thinking, okay, well, I have a small roster of clients, or I have a small practice and I want to grow my practice. I think, is it fair to say that insurance is still a primary or large avenue of funding, or something that's at least worthy of our attention to get credentialed and set up?
100%. So the medical model is a model, especially as we head to a recession, people are going to lean more on what coverage they have than selective private pay. Now, it doesn't mean we can't get creative with private pay, as we'll talk about later in the episode, but especially with speech, I think it's a cornerstone. And I think speech therapy right now, in almost every state, I can say you can be sustainable through insurance as, we'll just say 50% of your funding model. I'm not telling you to be 100% funding model, but I think that there's a place for 50%. But the other thing we have to look at, Kate, when we look at your business algorithm, like when I talk about your business algorithm, what I'm talking about is your employees, your overhead, all the pieces, what comes in and what goes out in expenses. There's a big difference if I'm talking to Kate and Kate has 50 therapists versus Gina, who has 2 therapists. When Gina only has 2 therapists, there is a supply and demand thing here where we have more control. We might not need insurance because there's less of us to go around. But when we've got 30 therapists that want full-time work, we're going to need to play in the insurance game. It's not a matter of if, it's when. Unless we're really a school contracting company, insurance is going to play a big part. So what I want to say is that when we have a lot of therapists, we're going to lean on government contracts, school contracts, insurance contracts as our primary cash flow of our practice. And we're going to utilize private pay and creative funding sources for some of our unique outliers and identifiers of what separates us as an organization.
So to say that back to you, it sounds like it's fair to say if you're operating in a business model where volume is a part of your revenue stream, so you're not seeing 10 clients a week, you're seeing, I don't know, you've got 17 people working for you and each of them has a caseload of 20. That's when you really start to lean on insurance as a backbone of your practice from a funding standpoint.
I would say the combination of insurance and what I'm calling government contracts, and I consider school kind of under government because we're
That makes sense.
funded.
Mhm.
So I would say those two entities are more of transactional funding. I do it, I get paid. I do it, I get paid. There's a reliability, there's a consistency. I go to the pool, I stick my straw in it, and I drink some revenue, so to speak.
Sounds
so
lovely.
So those two factors play a part when I've got overhead to support that's greater than just a couple of us playing in the pool.
Okay. This is a wonderful analogy. I feel relaxed, like I'm sipping on a cocktail, sitting on a poolside somewhere, instead of, buried under the horrible paperwork that is insurance funding. So let's talk about that a little bit. If we're really thinking about the kinds of funding sources that are available, I know so many private practice owners who deliberate for a very long time as to whether or not to start accepting insurance because of the administrative burden that comes along with that. And I know we're going to get into that when we start talking about our third learning objective. But let's talk a little bit more about the logistics and structure of insurance funding models. What would you say are some of the key necessary pieces to bring that into your practice if you don't already have that set up?
Well, the first thing I actually want to just talk about is when we're dealing with insurance, we actually have two different buckets that we can pull from: in-network, out-of-network.
Oh, yes. Yes. It's like a decision tree. It's like private pay versus insurance. And then insurance is broken up into two of them.
Or we could also say one is an RV and one is a plane. I don't know if you've heard that radio ad for RVing, but it makes me never want to step on a plane. It's got kids screaming that you're on the runway and it's really awful. So there's what I call air travel, and today we'll call that insurance. And then there's RVing, which is out of network. We'll call that out of network. There's good and bad in both circumstances.
Interesting. Okay.
So,
but one sounds a lot more like fast and one sounds a lot more luxurious. Is that intended?
Depends how you play it. So let's say it this way. We're going to start with in-network. So why do we accept in-network? Because we can get more clients. It's a marketing action. I just want to be transparent. When people are accepting insurance as an in-network provider, you have a bigger pool of people that want your services. And you might not have enough of a differentiator to pull outside of that bucket. So you sacrifice pay in order to tap into the pool of in-network clients, subscribers. Now, we're going to put that to the side and we're going to look at out-of-network. Out-of-network allows you to name your price. You have price control. So a lot of people like out-of-network because you're not subject to the in-network rates. Now, within the out-of-network bucket, I want to make sure everyone understands there are three different ways that we can play the out-of-network game. The first is we accept assignment of benefits and we submit to insurance. So it feels similar to in-network because we're waiting to get paid by insurance and we're submitting the claims on behalf of our client, our subscriber. But we get to name the prices. So we're not subject to contracted rates. We have our fee schedule, and whatever the out-of-network covers, they cover, and they will pay us, and we will charge whatever the responsibility is of the patient. If they don't pay, we will charge the full rate that we charge the client, the insurance to our client. And that is what I call out of network accepting assignment of benefits.
AOB. I know that
A-
acronym.
AOB.
AOB, assignment of benefits. Okay. So just to, again, say this back to you so that people are following along. We've got insurance divided into two categories, in network and out of network. And out of network, this is where you're billing insurance directly but setting your own fee schedule and accepting the AOB, the assignment of benefits.
So that's one bucket.
That's one of them.
Of
But
three
it sounds
options
like
when
there's
you're out of
three options for out of network.
Three. So that's just one.
I'm going to guess that one of them is a super bill.
Yep.
All right.
So
Why don't you tell us about that one next?
So the second one is, hey, Kate, here it is. I'm going to take your money, $185. Boom, give it to me. Here's your receipt, your super bill, your codes, my MPI, everything. You do what you want with it. You submit it to insurance, and there's a good chance that you're going to get reimbursement if you take the effort to do it. And if you need anything more, like copies of my notes or whatnot, let me know. So we've got
Easy peasy. Wash my hands of it. That sounds great to me.
polarizing energy. So one is, oh my gosh, I'm still responsible, but I'm getting my rates. The other is like, give me my money. Here you go. Go have at it. Whatever you get, and you're on your own.
Right.
So then there's the middle bucket.
Oh, I didn't know that there was a middle bucket.
So the middle bucket is, I'm going to charge you, Kate, $185. I'm going to submit. I know everyone's like, why did you come up with that
I know,
dollar
I'm
amount?
like, should we have a conversation about setting your rates? Maybe that's another episode. Anyway, keep going. We're in the middle bucket.
So we're in the middle bucket. I charge $185. Kate pays me $185, but rather than me give her a super bill, I'm going to submit the claim to her on her behalf, but I will not accept assignment of benefits. So the insurance will pay Kate. But meanwhile, I've saved her a step by submitting the claim for her, and I'll know right away if it gets rejected or processed or whatnot. So I am speeding up the process, and I'm doing a little bit of work, but I'm not necessarily getting hit by the cash flow of waiting to get paid by the insurance company.
But you're also taking on some of the administrative responsibility as a courtesy to the family versus the super bill where you're just giving them a bill and walking away with your cash.
And here's the other kind of curveball. You ready for one more curveball?
I wasn't prepared for a curveball.
So here's the curveball. I'm giving a disclaimer. This is not advice. It's just a perspective. You got to deal with it and think with it and check with your accountant, lawyer, everything. So don't hold me to it. But there is a world when we are what I call a private pay practice that offers the opportunity of out of network, where we don't accept assignment of benefits, that we say, look, here's your super bill, but if you want us to submit, we have a subscription price for us to submit on your behalf. So you charge, hey, $50 a month and we'll do all your submissions for you.
Interesting. So it's like you're charging the family for an administrative service.
To save the energy. And we're not under contract with an insurance company, so it's not looked at as a surcharge or anything. It is an elective service that we are offering. Hey, you want us just kind of like, hey, you want us to offer you 30 minutes of childcare while you wait to come back for your child? We've got childcare as well.
Interesting.
It's just an alternative way to say, we know that sometimes the burden of submitting is worth an extra $50 a month. And so for you to submit all the claims on our behalf, like, it's worth it. And it's month to month. You can cancel it anytime.
Interesting. That definitely sounds like I want to have a conversation with my accountant and attorney first kind of flavor, but talk about creative solutions. That's a really, really interesting perspective. Okay. So we've got under our insurance umbrella, we've got in network, out of network. You've walked us through these three options for operating out of network. I only knew of the super bill. So that's really helpful. But when we start talking about going in network, I feel like that's where a lot of clinicians start to get like hives. Like they reimburse at such lower rates than private pay. You take on all of this additional administrative burden. You become a covered entity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So where do you even, I'm curious to hear where you're even going to start going down this road with the in-network piece.
So the first step is, I think you have to have a vision of what you're trying to do. And when you're going in network, usually there's two things that impact that decision. One is what I call scale, the size of what you want to produce. And the other is accessibility, that you want to make your services more accessible to those who might not be able to access it. So that's the first, that's the why. Let's define the why. The next thing is we have to reach out and find out what fee schedules are currently. You would be amazed by how many people go in network and don't know what the rates are. And I literally just had a meeting last week, I think it was. Yeah. Last week with a client that they reached out and they're like, look, we want to know how to bill OTPT speech. And they're like, can we find out? And it was one of my 30-minute free strategy sessions. So they went, they credentialed, they contracted, they did everything. I said, do you know how much you're going to get paid? He said, no. So why would you contract? Like, would you sign up for a dinner without knowing how much the dinner is going to cost you?
But how do you find out? I always, and maybe this is wrong, but we're going to be vulnerable here and have a learning moment for the entire audience to understand something better. How do you even find out? I was always under the impression that contracts between insurance payers and providers were under lock and key. Once you had that contract, you weren't supposed to talk about insurance. Not to mention talking about money makes people uncomfortable to begin with.
So
how do
technically
you find
speaking,
out?
yeah, an in-network provider should not be sharing their rates with you, and what they get paid might not be what you get paid. So what you need to do as part of your utilization management process, which is where you're connecting with that, is you need, so I always say, the more power that you have, the easier it is to get what you want.
Touche.
So if a client comes to you and says, I would love for you to work with my insurance, I have the client call their insurance and say, I have a provider that I want. I can't find anyone in the area. Can utilization management help me connect you with this client? And that might sound weird, but like literally I start in that way because I've got the power. Now, it could be that what they do is they come to me and they say, hey, we need you as an in-network provider. My first thing is I need your fee schedule. Show me your fee schedule. Sorry, that fee schedule won't work. Well, then they may do a letter of memorandum or a memorandum of understanding, which is like a single use contract in which you can name your price for that client. And then upon, depending on how many people they end up needing you, they may grandfather you in to that in-network contract at the rate that you want. That's the first thing to understand, that sometimes when you hold the power, you actually can negotiate. And so sometimes a patient saying, I don't have a provider of the quality I need within your network. I found someone. Can you work with them to either create a letter of understanding or whatever you want to call it, a single use contract with this provider? And sometimes they'll also just bring you into their in-network. So that's one thing. Second thing is you can contact the insurance. And I get people are like, I never get a call back. I never got an email. It might take you 60 emails and calls. You got to be persistent. You doing it once, twice, three times. Do I seem like someone that lets you drop the ball? No, I'm like, I'm going to chase you down.
Your little avatar was very intense. I will give you that.
Very intense. And I'm currently contracting with someone right now that I said, literally like every other day, I'm like, hey, I haven't heard back. Where are we at? What's your timeline? Who do I need to talk to, et cetera? Because we know staffing is hard, but I also throw my patient minions on the insurance to say, I need you to contract with Brandon. I need you to contract with Brandon. I need you to contract with Brandon. It works. But
you have to create that leverage because we don't
you
have that leverage.
The leverage. If you don't have that leverage, then you have to be a squeaky wheel where you call and you say, I understand you sent me a contract. I need to know the rates. Do not sign a contract. Is it based on CMS? What is that? If they say to you, well, you need to sign that contract before we'll share the rates with you, don't do it. Don't do it.
That's really great advice. And I think that many of us feel beholden to whatever the insurance company dictates. We don't see ourselves in positions of power, or we don't see ourselves as being individuals who could create leverage or create more of that position of power. So that's tremendous advice. I'm wondering,
just so that everyone understands, because I work with insurance throughout many, many states. Medicaid only works in very few states. And I just want to be very transparent. And this was the mistake that this other group did, is they contracted with Medicaid, not realizing it's $32.50 for a visit. Okay.
That is not clinical staff rates. That
So
is not clinician rates. That's
it de-
horrifying.
but then I can go to Texas and get $86.50 or $88.50 or whatnot for a 92507. So each state is different. But what I want you to understand is the majority of states, Medicaid, there's a reason why people don't accept it. So if you're like, no one takes Medicaid, so I'm going to go take it. There's a reason why. Well, Brandon, there's this underserved and they need it. I go, you're going to lose money. You're going to lose money. Well, how did the hospitals do it? How do the healthcare systems do it? Totally different contract. It's not the same contract.
Wow.
So first and foremost, it's very hard if you're not in Texas or a couple other states, it's very hard to work with Medicaid. California, New Jersey, Florida, good luck. Florida, you can do it. California, New Jersey, I have yet to find a private practice who's not a nonprofit, who does not have grant money or other things to offset it, who can do Medicaid. Now, by and far, I'm going to throw this out there, a 92507 reimburses for commercial insurance or some HMOs, usually between $55 to $98 is the average for that 92507, just so we know that language code. Now, where speech is able to optimize is a lot of speech are getting into feeding, and they're pairing a 92526, a feeding code for myofunctional and myofascial, all that, with a 92507. Well, now all of a sudden they're doing that untimed code. They're doing 2 units within whatever they decide is needed, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever they dictate. And now they took, quote unquote, let's just say $55 and $55. Now they're getting $110 for that visit. That's
Right.
how they're making in-network work, just so we know.
Right. Combining different codes. And if you're listening and you haven't explored the different combinations of different CPT codes, the American Speech and Hearing Association website does have a good, I'd say, gateway website into how the different codes can be used, what the different codes are for. But that's a really, really awesome suggestion. And I think, as I mentioned, so many of us feel beholden to what the insurance companies say we can do. It's very intimidating, particularly if you're a small practice trying to grow. You sign away in blood on the dotted line and cross your fingers that you don't commit break some sort of rule or infringe upon some law, because once you sign that contract, you do become what's called a covered entity. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you are beholden to additional laws and regulations. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I'm going to jump to that, but I want to just finish one thing on
Oh,
the
yeah, go
code
for it.
thing. Just because there's codes does not mean you can use the codes. Does not mean that just because you can use the codes does not mean you'll get paid for the codes. Just because the codes are approved as a benefit does not mean that insurance has to pay for that code. So there's a lot to understand in terms of exclusions and evidence of coverage and all these factors, whether it's in network, out of network, and whether you can code things together. A lot of times I'll see people reference ASHA, and there's a lot of great info in ASHA, but there have been some management codes that were misquoted and are illegal to be used. So please check.
Interesting.
Please check, because some of these management codes should not be used depending on insurance and location and all those things. So a lot of the times what a coding professional will do is they will check their AAPC. Again, I'm going to say it one more time. AAPC is a coding professional association, kind of like you have your association. It is, in my opinion, the elite of medical billers. They've got certifications that you take crazy tests for, and etc. They have a product called Codify. And in that Codify, you can check codes together, what's required, what the requirements are, etc., just in terms of coding regulations, so that everyone.
I'm laughing because I was in there this morning.
There you go.
I didn't know I was using an elite database or an elite service, but that's good to know. They have some info, they have a paid service, but they also have some good free information on their website as well.
They have both. And I think that even everyone always asks me, like, where should I go to learn how to bill? And I say, there's not a direct here's how to bill as a speech language pathologist. There's not. But there are some good classes and courses and things that you put together. And sometimes it's about understanding Medicaid and Medicare, which there are some great resources out there for that. And sometimes it's going to ASHA, and sometimes it's going to private practice specialists, and sometimes it's going just to the coding world like AAPC and Codify. So all of that is helpful, but let's get back to your question, which is kind of the liabilities of being an in-network provider and kind of doing that. So we find out, you know what, Brandon, I'm going in network. I'm going to make the pricing work. So you need to make sure that you're paying your staff correctly. You need to make sure that you have that business algorithm of how much should I pay for therapy. So I'm going to give you one nugget real quick. I know this is kind of I just want to give a lot of content for you all.
I'm here for it. Do it.
Your revenue that a therapist generates, they should never take more than 60% in total cost of the revenue they generate. Never. So if you accept a rate, in this case, that's $55, okay? And of that $55, you say, you know what, Brandon, I don't want to do a 30-minute visit. They need an hour. Okay. So at the end of the day, if we were to say, what am I paying them? Your total cost, taxes, benefits, everything cannot exceed $33 for that visit.
I think that's great advice. And I joked earlier with the margins comment, but this is something that I learned sort of on the road. And when you do math by looking at the percentage of visit, it's a really, at least for me as a practitioner who is not a mathematician, it's a really nice way to keep your profits and your revenue in check as you build things along to make sure you're not accidentally cutting into a budget too steep, or, you know, you have enough room for overhead. I think that's very sound advice.
Yeah. So we want to know. So when people say, what should I pay my therapist? What's my productivity? It all comes down to the revenue they generate and them getting 60% and us just basically financially modeling what that looks like. Here's what 60% productivity looks like. Here's what 70% looks like. Here's what 75% productivity. So sometimes we build a base payoff of 60% productivity and we bonus above. There's all different ways to play the tricks, but getting back to in-network insurance, we accept the prices. Okay, I've made a deal with the devil, so to speak, and some of these insurances are the devil. So then we need to understand, what does it take? We need to make sure we're credentialed. We need to make sure that we have software that allows us to submit electronically. And ideally, we also set up electronic payment, the ERA, electronic remittance. And so these are all factors that we want to structure. The other thing we need to understand is how long it takes to get credentialed. And how does it work in terms of if someone's not credentialed, what are our rights and what is right and what is wrong? There's a lot of gray areas. So like one of the things is, can I have this therapist bill under me because I'm credentialed with insurance? That's a gray hole that is an abyss. And it's like, well, I do that for my CF. So can I do that with someone? Depends. All I'm going to say is it depends. There are insurance companies that will tell you under no circumstances can the rendering provider not be the credentialed provider.
Interesting.
So
and this
there's
is really a case by case basis. You really have to know exactly what your contracts are, what your payers will and will not allow.
And you have to ask the right questions, not set them up for the answers that you want to hear.
I love that. It's not manipulation, it's smart communication.
Yep.
It's wise. It's good question asking. Okay, so let's play pretend you've made a deal with the devil, as you said. I love that expression. And not only now are you beholden to being credentialed and using an EMR, but there are other requirements as well. Can you tell us?
So we're credentialing. We've got the EMR system. We got to verify eligibility. We got to make sure we're getting authorizations. We need to make sure that we're disclosing, obviously, what the out-of-pocket max would be for them. It's called a good faith estimate. Ironically, side note, my mother-in-law called me and said that she was chasing down all her providers for one of my father-in-law's procedures, asking for a good faith estimate. I'm like, you shouldn't have to ask for it. They should already provide that to you.
Right.
You know, things like that. The other thing I want to make sure that everyone knows is that when you are in network, with an insurance company, you're not, so most contracts, I'm going to say it this way because I don't like to talk in black and white. Most contracts will not allow you to see a client unless it is through their funding source for a medically covered service. So if Kate has Blue Cross and I accept Blue Cross and Kate says, hey, Brandon, I just want to come to you private pay. I don't want to use my insurance. The minute you hear she's a Blue Cross subscriber, it is Blue Cross or nothing, honey. Like there's no middle ground there. So you have to recognize that there is this component where I said, Kate, I'm an in-network provider. It is, you have disclosed that you are a Blue Cross provider. I must treat you through your insurance. I'm obligated by my contract. Now, if something's not medically covered and it is not a medical necessity, then you need to have a release form that helps them understand that they are signing up for elective services that are not part of their medical benefit, that they understand that their insurance will not be held liable in any form, and that I like to say this is recreational and elective solutions that you are choosing to sign up for, and that they sign it really clear, because you do not want that receipt going to the insurance and the person saying, I thought I'd see if they cover it. What do I have to lose?
Right.
No, you can cost me my contract. So it's very important that you have that agreement so that you say, nah, 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 nah. I had them sign this. They knew it was not medically necessary, because insurance has two objectives. And I mean no disrespect when I say this, but it may offend insurance companies who are listening. One is they want to only cover what they have to cover.
Yep.
And I'm going to say that again. They only want to cover what they have to cover. And what's the second thing? They do not want to get sued.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to get sued. But I think that the point you're making is such a wonderful one, and really, really important, because so many of us are so afraid of the big, scary insurance fraud, right? So like, what's covered and what's not covered. And I am going to take this moment to get on a little bit of a soapbox that almost all of our listeners have heard me get on. I want to say every single episode, because we talk about it so often. Indirect service. There is such little coverage for indirect service. And I complain about it all the time, because indirect service is a critical part of providing high quality evidence-based interventions, right? So these are things like consulting with classroom teachers, consulting with parents, providing training, reviewing documentation, working on generalization while the client or the patient isn't physically present. And it's my understanding that these indirect services are generally not covered by insurance funding.
100%. They're not part. So I'm going to take everyone into a sandbox right now. We're sitting in this sandbox, okay? And all these grains are, all the sand grains represent the needs of one person to reach their best self, okay? So we're in, have you ever seen those turtle sandboxes? I love them. The green ones.
Oh,
with
yes.
Sand in, everything.
That was that's a callback to my childhood right there. They were
So
all so hot.
Visually, we're in this green turtle, and all of the sand grains represent the needs that we have to be successful in life, functionally, health-wise, everything. All of those sand grains, for the sake of this analogy, could be benefited by speech therapy. But guess what? Only one handful from that entire sandbox is considered medical necessity.
Which is horrifying. Back to, what did you say? Deal with the devil in thinking about our healthcare system and the red tape and the funding issues. If there are that many grains of sand, that there are that many needs to only be provided coverage and funding for these medically necessary handful of grains of sand. And I think, I wonder, go ahead.
Do you know why?
Because they're not medically necessary, or because the insurance company doesn't want to pay for it and doesn't want to get sued?
But, well, that's true. But the reason why it's only one hand, truly one hand versus two or three or a bucket full, is because the benefit that we operate in is a very specific bucket called a rehabilitation benefit. And because it's a rehabilitation benefit, it provides such a narrow lens of need for the medical function of a person, a child, etc.
That just leaves so many grains of sand.
Exactly.
So
So
many.
why isn't speech therapy also part of a behavioral benefit? Why is it only in the rehab benefit?
I don't know why. You're the expert. Tell me.
So some person or people came up with this idea of medical necessity, and they've segmented functionally what people need. So you tell me, back in the day, when I say back in the day, 20 years ago, we could get someone weeks and weeks of rehab for a stroke rehabilitation. And now you're lucky if you get maybe 2 weeks if you're lucky. So the grains are changing based on utilization. And so this comes back to, we've put our livelihood in the hands of an insurance company.
Yep.
And that's the mistake we as a society have done, because the insurance is a for-profit.
Yes.
They will make profit before they make well on your policy. They're betting on you being healthy. They're betting. So when we spend, let's just throw out a number. We spend $9,000 on our premium, let's say, a year. They're betting on you spending less than $9,000 on your healthcare coverage. That's what they're betting on.
And
Plain
I think
and simple.
making the point or reminding us that they're a for-profit company is such a sickening lens, really. I mean, it's sort of bothersome. But I wonder if we could get back to all of these other grains of sand in the turtle sandbox, because it's sort of touching on our second learning objective, which is creative funding solutions. So if you are a provider, you are, looking at the one handful of services that you're able to provide, 92506, 92507, 92609. I'm just like rattling off the ones that I happen to use all the time. You know that they're covered services. You have the family sign a contract knowing that if you provide any indirect services, you have them sign an agreement that they understand it is not covered by their insurance, et cetera. How do you go about getting funding for some of these indirect service that, as a clinician, is critical and necessary for their well-being, for their progress, to make gains, for good patient outcomes? But to your point before, it's a matter of accessibility. Not all families are sitting, they're not the Scrooge McDuck diving in their basement with gold coins. If you don't get that reference, then you're not as old as I am.
Yeah.
But I wonder what other funding solutions a clinician could employ, or at least counsel their client about when they're in that position.
Yeah. So I almost sang the DuckTales song, just so you know. But I won't, because
You
I
want
want
to sing, you can. You're allowed.
I'm close to it, but I will digress. So the first thing is you need to play the game to understand that on this buffet table, only the medical necessity is connected to insurance. We have to stop trying to fit a 16 meal buffet into one plate. And that's what we're doing. How do I get insurance to cover it? How do I get insurance to cover it? How do I get insurance to cover it? So if I'm trying to get 10,000 grains of sand into one funnel, it's not possible. So I have to play the game by saying, what is part of this rehab benefit? What can I cover under this rehab benefit? And how do I tap into other resources to support this person, this child, this family, whoever it may be, depending on your demographic? So creative things, just so we can think outside the box. First thing first, and you have to check with your lawyer, check with your CPA. Please don't take my word for this. But there is a world where you have two different companies, two different tax IDs, two different MPIs. One is Brandon Siegel Rehab, and I focus on the rehabilitation of yourself, and I only focus on that medical necessity. I'm an in-network provider. Here we go. Boom. But then I have this neighboring company that's called B. Sieg's Concierge, where we are an out-of-network focused on well-being, function, and elevating the way that you walk through life. Okay. And
that was a very smooth commercial to fly right off the top of your head.
See, you would never know that
Creative
I was a theater
Solutions by
major.
Brandon Siegel.
Before I went to business school, Brandon was in the performing arts.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So anyway, we could have a concierge care that works on things that are outside of the medical model. We could work on, and then we have the medical model. That's one thing. Just sometimes we'll do in-network and out-of-network. Also, there are some things that we see as in-network versus some things that are out-of-network. Again, I'm throwing some curveballs here. The next thing is just in terms of creative funding. We could participate in care credit. Care credit is a funding option, kind of like a credit card. You can offer 0%. And it might be that you say, hey, we offer care credit to help offset some of these additional resources, services that you need that are above and beyond medical necessity. And you get 18 months to pay that down as a monthly premium. So that sometimes it's not free money. Sometimes it's leveraged money or time-based money that you do, so that Kate can get paid by care credit on day one, but then the patient has 18 months to pay that off. And we're seeing that to be very helpful right now, even with those who are in network with insurance when things are needed. Now, something I did not say that I think is really important that everyone understand. If you bill insurance as an in-network provider and you make the mistake and it gets denied by insurance, you are not allowed to charge the patient for that. So if you treat a patient without an authorization and it is denied with cause, you must eat it. You cannot charge the patient. And there are a lot of people out there that think you can charge a patient. Well, I held them to it. No, you didn't get authorization. You're in breach of that contract. You have to eat it, not the patient, not the insurance, just so we're on the same page.
I mean, in some ways, it's comforting to know that there are all these regulations that protect the patient. But in other ways, it's so disheartening to really take a step back and look at all the red tape and barriers that go in between a provider providing high quality care and giving the patient the treatment that they need.
Playing with insurance reminds me of the board game Risk. If you ever played Risk, you have to know how to dominate and put all your forces together to win the land, because it takes world domination to be at its best when you're working with insurance. So if you like the game Risk, then absolutely you'll like the insurance game. It's tactical, it takes strategy, it takes mindset, and it takes a team. But when done correctly, you're making therapy accessible on a whole nother level. So getting back to creative funding options, another idea. We're seeing a lot of subscription-based options right now. We're seeing a lot of speech companies offer things as low as, hey, $99 a month, and you get a 15-minute this and a 30-minute this, and all these different ways of both synchronous and asynchronous speech therapy to augment and support above and beyond the medical needs. So again, you can combine forces if you do it right and you stay true to your contracts. The other creative funding source that I'm a big fan of is partnering with a nonprofit and coming up with sponsorships and saying, look, we want to work with the same community as you. We're going to help you fundraise. We know that people need tax deductions. We don't want to be a nonprofit, but what we'd like to do is come up with criteria where we have scholarships that fund therapy for children or families or parents or people. And this is what the scholarship looks like. And this is how we're going to help fundraise for these scholarships. And that allows us to really get to that next level. So I think scholarships are a great way to get sponsorship. The other thing going on to it is we're seeing more and more, I had talked about it earlier, employer funded models. How do we contract with employers to fund services through a capitated contract? What does a capitated contract mean? It means you get a certain amount of revenue per month to support their entire demographic. And you basically are banking that not too many are going to use it, but it allows you to have like a certain amount of money flowing in for the accessibility of your services. Other things, we've got early start DDD money. We've got grants if we are a nonprofit. We have some grants that are not DDD or not nonprofit related. I just heard of someone that got $50,000 of funding for being a small business from their local SBA for them to put into programming for the community.
Holy cow, that's a big check.
$50,000. So have you connected with Because what is the SBA? The SBA does not require you to be a nonprofit. They're trying to help small businesses thrive. So have you connected to your local SBA group? Free money right there.
That's such a good suggestion. I also love the idea of, I mean, I guess I'm looking at all of this through my clinical specialty, which is AAC, which, as we know from the literature, AAC interventions are really only as successful as the indirect service provision that accompany them, right? So you can have the best device in the world, but if you're not getting trained on it, if you're not, carrying it out into the community and using it in places, and your communication partners aren't being trained, it's not going to be anywhere near as effective. And so the idea of embracing some of these creative funding solutions through care credit or through a nonprofit, through scholarship, it really is opening a very different perspective into how to really support those individuals. But I'm sure that applies to all aspects of speech pathology. I'm just selfishly looking at it through my own lens.
Well, and what we're also seeing is we're educating schools on how to better budget where they spend their money. So I'm finding school districts that are specifically budgeting tens of thousands of dollars on just education of teachers related to AAC.
Yeah.
How are you tapping in to also, there are some schools that every 3 years they get to revise their budget. How are you creating partnerships in the community above and beyond just an IEP based need?
Okay, so looking back at our learning objectives, I'm just sort of zooming back out. You've given us so much information, and I'm thinking again about the clinician who's listening to this and has a small practice or is trying to grow and scale and is maybe playing the insurance game, but they just have a ticket to the game. They're not in the stadium. They're not embracing the components of mindset and strategy and risk as you so eloquently described. I'm wondering if you can give some advice to those clinicians listening on how to minimize that administrative burden, right? Because some of at least when you first get into the insurance game, it is very overwhelming. I mean, you've got the claims, you've got, a million acronyms, AOBs, EFTs. There's a lot that you have to sift through. So what advice can you give clinicians on how to minimize some of that administrative burden at the outset, but also throughout the growth of your clinic?
So first off, I think you need to hire for skill sets that you don't have. And so whether you're bringing in someone with that expertise or you're outsourcing, I think when you're committing to the most important part of your business, I know you don't want to know this, but it's fuel. And I say it this way, we're a vehicle of change. Our purpose is not to make money. It really is not, because if it is, you're going to be unfulfilled. But we have a purpose that we're trying to achieve greatness, change the community, all this stuff. But in order for our vehicle of change to reach our optimal destination, we need fuel. And the more fuel, the farther we can go, the more change, the more purpose, etc. And so when we're investing in a fuel line, don't just read a blog and think you know how to medically bill. Hire consultants, hire people, hire a billing agency, a credentialing agency, someone who can set up the infrastructure. Now, what I want you to know, and I'm saying this honestly, this is in no way a plug to me, because I'll be honest, I'm very particular about the practices we take on, because it's a huge investment when you invest in a company the right way. But what I am saying is 90% of billing agencies out there are garbage. They're garbage. So you want to measure who has AAPC certified coders, who are on site, on the ground in the United States, people that you can talk to, people that will respond to your text, people that are co-creating with you, that you know are going to bleed for you. And recognize the smaller you are, the harder it is to find quality support. So you may find a contractor if you're using the contractor eligibly correct, but you may find a billing agency. You may go and look and go to a conference and meet people. Every time you hire a billing agency or a specialist, I want you to get 5 references. 5. I don't want
That's
5
a lot of references.
for billing. Yes, because
Well, I guess if 90% of them are garbage, you're going to need 5.
You want 5, and you want 5 industry specific.
You set a high bar.
I do, because This is our lifeline. This is
No, you're right.
everything.
I think the
So-
analogy of the fuel line is fabulous.
So what do I do for a living? I put out fires. I'm trying to prevent you from needing a firefighter. And truly, I say this, I see, I'm working with a speech clinic right now that just had the worst billing experience possible with one of these agencies. They overpromise, they underdeliver, they don't spend enough time really helping. And then they justify, like, what do you expect? We're just, trying to get through and bill, blah, 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 blah. Find high purpose, high intentional people that have an emotional response to doing right by you. And that takes references, and that takes people, and that takes the right fit, because there's a lot of, we'll say, wolves in sheep's clothing, so to speak. And it's sad. And that's why I hate to say it, Kate, but the number one thing I go home and tell my wife is people stink. And it's because it's really hard to find
That was
high
very
intentional.
PG version of, I'm sure, what comes out of my mouth.
Yeah. And so find high intentional people that want to really support you, that really care, that are willing to put their reputation on the line to co-create with you, and that are willing to say, hey, if this doesn't work, you have an easy out. You never want someone locking you into a contract, ever, 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 ever. So, so the first thing is you have to find people that can help you get to that next level. The second is you need the right systems in place. You need solid EMR system. You need the right policies and procedures that protect you. You need artificial intelligence is so crucial today. Now there's new software and systems, and I don't have the name off the top of my head, but there are softwares out there that will do your eligibility and authorizations and tell you what you need to pay. Really invest in measure twice, cut once. A lot of the times we try to grow too quickly. And again, I saw another client recently that said to me, Brandon, I'm losing cash flow. I'm losing cash flow. I need help. I need help now. I don't know what I'm doing. And the problem was they said, I need more clients. I said, you don't need more clients. You need to find out where your loss leader is. You've done something wrong in the algorithm. Your fuel line is wrong. Marketing allows us to find future destinations of how far we can go. But if the fuel line, we could be running on empty for a long way. And so just make sure that you really tap into understanding what you're doing. Start small. Grow smart. Don't try and out-create and get, oh my gosh, I want to grow so fast. The people that are the most successful that I meet are the people who said, I never envisioned having 10 therapists. I just wanted 1 or 2. And then it organically happened and it felt right, versus the person that says, I want to be $1 million private practice. I want to sell for the big money. You're in it for the wrong reason then. Start with your purpose. Grow smart. Slow and steady wins the race. This is a triathlon.
We usually end our episodes with what are your parting words of wisdom, but I think you just nailed it. I mean, that was so inspiring and so well done. And I'm so grateful.
Thank you. I tried.
You succeeded. It was wonderful. To everybody who is listening, all of the references that we mentioned throughout this episode are going to be listed in the show notes, as well as where you can find more information about the conference and about Brandon's company. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to write in. Brandon, we're so, so, so grateful for having you with us today. Thank you for sharing so much.
Thank you, Kate. It's been so much fun. Don't get discouraged. The opportunity is there. You just have to play the game right.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us in today's episode. As always, you can use this episode for ASHA CEUs. You can also potentially use this episode for other credits depending on the regulations of your governing body. To determine if this episode will count towards professional development in your area of study, please check in with your governing bodies, or you can go to our website, www.slpnerdcast.com. All of the references and information listed throughout the course of the episode will be listed in the show notes. And as always, if you have any questions, please email us at info@slpnerdcast.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to welcome you back here again soon.